Alright, making a video. Yeah, I'll probably edit this one, and so it's for a purpose, to engage in a bit of conversation, if it can be had, on the subject of free will and determinism, for the future episode on that subject of Vloggerdome, the TV show. And yeah, kind of looking for opposition bits, counter theories, and the one that will be expounded here, and some sort of debate. So you have to probably have a willingness to have your clip used in the show and something like that, blah blah blah. Or I'll just take your argument as a comment or something else and use it, something like that. So that's the purpose of this anyway. So I might comment on this video as I make this video. I might re-edit it with commentary explaining what I was getting at, because I didn't get at it perfectly. But breaking the subject down, the first elements are like free will. We could just take those pieces and work on those, or we could work on this alternative word of determinism, which is more of a conversation that would start with, what is this made out of? And it's all photons, and photons don't do magical things, so you're kind of stuck with a closed system that doesn't have any place for indeterminate variation. The activities are all pool table balls banging into each other kind of a mechanism. No room for a freedom in there, or do something non-required by the circumstance. Nothing outside the physics. Adding a little context, this whole mechanical part of the free will debate really depends on some understanding of physics and chemistry, even biology, and understanding that it is all made out of some consistency, that things do certain things, certain chemicals react certain ways, and they do it based on statistical equations in terms of likelihoods and how they meet each other, but it's all mechanical. There's no although there are some parts of the physical universe that we haven't seen every bit of, we can understand that there is no evidence for any parts that are doing something more intelligent, that they're all crude forces and crude entities. And if you're going to argue for a free will, a brain capable of overriding some sort of mechanical disposition that it's in, because of some good force or some bad force, you do have to explain where that force gets its energy from, where it gets its configuration, its dynamic, and where there's any evidence of that in any part of our experience. It ends up just being more conversation that should be necessary. It should just be understood that we live in a finite physical universe. It's physical universe, and that the physics of the universe is not controlling beyond the fact of the mechanical parts that we understand. And we can see that in the function of a computer and other devices that are highly complicated and have become very reliable, because there isn't any force or anything that just infects it like a gremlin or something. There are no gremlins, there are no angels, there are no things that are fiddling with the devices, and that the device of our psychology is similarly rigid, and there's nothing fiddling with it. More than I'd like to have said. Okay, continuing. So I guess let's just start with the word free will. Let's work on the free part, which is, let's just understand all these words are just words human beings pick to describe something. And fundamentally, freedom is a word used to describe liberation from confinement. And the irony of free will would be that the most confining thing you can acquire is knowledge. The smarter you are, the more incapable of mistakes you are. So if you know that 2 + 2 = 4, you're now limited, because now you're not going to be able to say 2 + 2 = 5 or 7 or 57 or 97. All of the options start disappearing because you're confined by knowledge. So in a funny sense, an ironic sense, the idea of free will would be free to be stupid, or free to be wrong, or free to be inaccurate. Well, this part kind of gets to the real bit about what is freedom and whether freedom is a good thing. And in the circumstance of defining a will, I think what people are really after is a definition of this good will, not a free will. The more freedom you have, it's likely freedom to get the answer wrong. There's more wrong answers than right answers. And there's more ways to do something wrong than there are ways to do something right. And that is a confinement of will, a refinement of will, that a concept like free will doesn't do anything to deal with. If people are free, free from what? Again, free from understanding the right way to do it. That's not freedom, in a sense. I mean, that's freedom to do it wrong, not freedom to do it right. That's not freedom to be improved. Improvement always takes, refinement always takes more, not less. More confinement, more restraint, more filtering. It's the opposite of free. You need inaccuracy. You need the liberty to do something wrong to have freedom. If there's a right way to do it and you're doing it the right way, you pretty much don't have freedom. And yet that's obviously the desirable outcome would be perfection, and any freedom to be imperfect wouldn't be a positive thing, it would be a negative thing. The ability to make a mistake isn't a good thing, it's a bad thing. So you want to be confined to perfection, not free to be wrong. Alright, just emphasize more wrong answers than right answers, and there's always a best answer, a best solution to any problem, and that's really what we're after. And freedom won't get you there. Knowledge will get you there, and knowledge is confining. Knowledge restrains the possible options. Once you know how to add 2 + 2, you don't have any alternative choices anymore. It's simple enough. So that's just part of this language problem. The word free has other problems in the sense that, again, it's a word I think we invented that really is describing the absence of the thing in the white space, the confinement, the liberation part of freedom is the only part that means anything. And so if you have, a liberated will, if you use the word liberated, what would it be liberated from? So clearly, I think for most people who would use that terminology would say that we are liberated from our desire, or liberated from stupidity, doing it badly, or being evil, or being nasty. That we have the freedom not to be nasty or stupid. Alright, I just add that, again, this will question is more about goodwill than free will.
unselfish will. This is more a conversation, I think, for people about overcoming your nature, having the freedom, quote unquote, to overcome your nature. And the only thing that's going to give you that freedom to overcome your nature is understanding, a better or stronger principle, a better ideal. And so, it has to be overcome by something real, not some just vague notion of having more choices. More choices won't make your answer correct. Understanding will make your answer correct.
And I would, to some extent, argue that there's a certain basic truth to that once you know better, you really shouldn't do unbetter, not better. That confinement should be in place. Once you know something is bad, you should be able to not be bad. But clearly it doesn't work in the sense that we have competing interests, and it's what ends up being our will ends up being the thing that is the stronger interest. So then you get into more, complex issues that don't much have anything to do with the freedom of your will, but the power of addictions and the power of psychological motivations. So I guess I could argue, I could explain, maybe, that I'm a nicotine addict, and I have been all my life. And I've never found the addiction, it wouldn't be something I would say was a good thing in my life. Unlike some smokers, I wasn't hostile to it either. I mean, I did sort of enjoy it. But in this circumstance where it costs you money and all this other crap and the aggravations, it's no longer an enjoyable vice, no longer an enjoyable addiction. This is more and more of an incentive to be free of it. But to be free of it does cost you, personal territory. You have to give away comfort to be liberated, to be free of it. And, that exchange has got to happen on a day-to-day basis, not a theoretical basis. You have to pay for it every day.
This cigarette addiction example is just a way of getting to the point that there's competing interests we have. We can have a habit, or we can have a tradition, or we can have a sensibility, a like, a dislike, a prejudice, all kinds of different things. And we can find that some part of us can have dissidence, or say that's not the right answer. That's not the right way to live. It's a waste. We can find waste in our function. And then we have a competing interest to fix that, to feel better about ourselves, to feel better about our functionality. And so now we have a competing interest. And it's this, how to balance the power of those influences, and what decides it, what's the tipping point, what makes us finally go in one direction or the other. So you would argue then this migrate from a selfish focus to an unselfish focus, and what subtle perceptions and what subtle realizations, what pieces of understanding of the reality make that more possible for people than others. And so now you're talking more about a conversation about philosophy and understanding than about will.
And some days you just don't have what you might call the internal capital, the wherewithal, the power, the strength, the courage, to face the burdens of the deprivation. But if I made the incentive very big, like if a bunch of evil Muslims kidnapped my sister and said they were going to cut her head off if I didn't quit smoking, it seems obvious that in that circumstance my will would be able to manifest the courage to deal with not smoking, to make the sacrifice, because I would have something I have a powerful incentive to do the right thing, a powerful psychological incentive that would be capable of overwhelming the powerful self-interest in putting it off and procrastinating and not dealing with it if I can avoid dealing with it.
All right, well, will's pretty much about bargaining, and that's what the subject really is the how do we bargain, what controls the bargaining that goes on in our own psychology. And in a lot of ways, the whole conversation is about what makes the difference between a person, a human who makes good deals with the world and a human who makes bad deals with the world in terms of being productive or destructive, in terms of their impact or their influence on the world. And I'm going to argue that this isn't something you can do accidentally. You know, you do have to understand to be capable of recognizing implications. You have to actually think about implications if you're going to have any real likelihood of having the right impact. You're going to probably have to do it on purpose, because most of the interactions you have are going to require a certain subtlety and perfection, not to make things messier or more chaotic, and those things are just going to lead to likely they just feed on themselves, creating more chaos and more vibration. That's sort of like the difference. The difference is between sculpting something and vibrating it into a different shape. One will create something that's refined and is capable of being useful, and one will create nothing. Disorder, broken, not good. So, but it's this bargain, and it's finding the right bargain. It's having these principles or these ideals reinforced and made strong enough to overcome the natural impulse to be selfish and not to look too hard, and certainly the nature to procrastinate and to avoid unpleasant truths. It's pretty much that simple.
And so when we look at that as a calculation, as a psychological dilemma, clearly there's nothing free in there. There's no liberation from the fact that for every individual there's going to be a strength they have, how much energy they have, and there's going to be a reality of how long the walk is, and their calculation is going to be different than your calculation. Their endurance is going to be different than your endurance, and comparison is perhaps useful in just identifying strength and weakness or something, if you're into that. But there's no point in saying one is freer and one is less free. If the person that had the easier choice because they had greater resources to make a choice, the affirmative choice, let's say, whatever that would be, their ability is just based on their circumstantial pressures. The fact that they are in a different gravity, pulled by different conditions, and it is these conditions that will decide what somebody chooses to do, what their will manifests as. And there just isn't anything outside of those calculations. I've never experienced something I could call a free will moment, in that I've always seen my consciousness produce a decision, and I've certainly seen the rationalizations are the rationale. I've either seen the good or bad logic used to create the conditions of the decision, and clearly it is these thought patterns and these mission statements that our brain creates, these mechanisms of guilt and desire and want, that will play out based on strengths in them and weaknesses in them. And there really isn't going to be a choice. There's just going to be a decision based on the constitution, the established hardware and software. And the result is going to be inevitable and potentially predictable, based on conditions. And we can sort of see that in statistical outcomes and patterns, and the fact that people don't migrate far from those predictable patterns, and that there's always reasons for the exceptions. And there's just no room for any power, force that's going to make that different, beyond forces or powers of that changes conditions, better disciplined principles, a better character built over time, practicing being less selfish, or more in control, or doing these certain practices, lifestyle practices, where you may become more competent in managing your psychology and in controlling the impulsiveness and the immediacy that often compels people to do foolish or stupid or unwise things that we would call a failure of their free will, when it's more a failure of their character, a failure of the life experience. They haven't practiced pitching the ball enough, and so they can't throw strikes. It's probably not much more complicated than that. They can't free will themselves into a major league pitcher. They have to practice themselves into that function. So you've got this hardware problem, you've got this verbiage problem, this vocabulary problem, and then you've got the fundamentally at the core, we're just talking about psychological manifestations of what we might call character, the priorities of the individual, and how many instruments of knowledge they have. If they know how to add 2 + 2, then they won't come up with wrong answers. If they don't know the mathematics of life, they don't know the value, they don't have a value understanding of their place in the world, if they have a distorted perception of their own importance, then yes, they'll do something bad in terms of their math. And we'll be able to say that's a poor exercise of their free will, but it was really just a poor exercise. It was just an example of their inability to do the math, because they don't know how to do it. Their brain isn't doing good math. It's just doing, psychological farting. That kind of thing. Oh, now it's still here. Crap.